although women committed roughly 10% of murders between 1976 and 2005. They were involved in nearly 35% of murders of intimate partners and nearly 30% of murders of where the victim was another family member. According to forensic psychologists and criminal profilers, women who kill have backgrounds and motivations that are often quite different from their male counterparts. Compared with men, women are more likely to be related to their victim, less likely to plan in advance, and less likely to use extreme violence. As the case with Mary O'Brien Farmer, killing a friend who loved and cherished her. Born in 1880, 27-year-old Mary O'Brien Farmer, a slight woman with partial facial paralysis, bears the rather dubious distinction of being the only woman from Jefferson County ever executed and the second woman in New York to be electrocuted. Mary was convicted of one of the most fiendish murders ever in 1908. In 1908, Mary lived with her husband, James, in a rather run-down house known as Barton Tavern on Patty Hill near Brownville. Sarah Brennan was her neighbor, friend and landlady. Sarah's mutilated and decaying body was found in a trunk belonging to Mary Farmer on April 27, 1908. What was revealed in subsequent investigation was a plot by Mary to take Sarah's house and to murder her friend. On October 31, 1907, Irish-born Mary O'Brien Farmer went to the Watertown offices of Attorney Francis Burns and told him she was Sarah Brennan and that she had a deed she wanted transferred to Mary Farmer. The unsuspecting attorney obliged. Mary forged Sarah's signature, and the deed was filed with the county clerk. Mary told her husband, James, a mill worker who was overly fond of his ale, that she had purchased the Brennan house for $1,200 and that Sarah Brennan was paying her $2.50 per week rent. Mary said she got the money for the house from an uncle in Buffalo. James never questioned Mary, although a rumor around Patty Hill and Brownville that the Brennans had sold their house to the Farmers was vehemently denied by Sarah and Patrick Patsy Brennan. No more was heard of the so-called purchase until April 23, 1908, when Mary told Patsy Brennan he must vacate his house and that Sarah had gone away and would never return. She showed Patsy the deed made out to Mary Farmer. Mary told Patsy several stories about the fate of his wife, all leading up to Sarah's refusal to continue to live with her husband of 25 years. She was said to be at several places in Watertown and in Duluth, Maine and Chicago. Sarah's body actually was in a trunk in Mary's back room. A trunk later moved to the Brennan house after Mary got an eviction notice against Patsy and he moved to the nearby Riverside Hotel. On April 27th, a distraught Patsy and Sheriff Ezra D. Bellinger and attorney Floyd L. Carlisle knocked on the door of the Brennan house, where the Farmers had since moved. After a thorough search of the house, the law enforcement officials came to a back shed or summer kitchen which contained several boxes and two trunks not yet unpacked since the move. The larger of the two trunks belonged to Mary Farmer. Since it was locked and no key could be produced, the sheriff broke the lock with a hammer. When the trunk lid was opened, the sickening odor of decaying flesh pervaded the room. A black cloth covered the contents of the trunk, which was little more than 2/3 filled. But when the cloth was pulled back a trifle, the stockinged outlines of a human foot and leg protruded. The cloth was the black skirt of a woman. The body was resting upon the face, the legs bent at the knees and the feet sticking upwards nearly to the top of the trunk. One end of the trunk was smeared with blood, and here the horrified officers disclosed the head, blood clotted, the back crushed in as with a blunt instrument. There was considerable blood in the bottom of the trunk, and some of it had oozed through upon the floor in the corner. Mr. and Mrs. Farmer disclaimed all knowledge of the body. They knew nothing about it, they said. Mary and James were arrested, and Mary first told police James had murdered Sarah, but later changed her story and said she had done it herself, hitting Sarah in the back of the head with an axe. Mary and James were taken to the county jail, Mary carrying the couple's infant son, Peter, to whom the Brennan property was deeded January 7, 1908. Mary went to trial June 16, 1908, in the Jefferson County Courthouse before Justice Watson M. Rogers. She was prosecuted by District Attorney F.B. Pitcher, who was assisted by Carlisle. Mary's defense was conducted by Atties John B. Coughlin and Robert Wilcox. The defense attempted to show that Mary was insane, or that Sarah's murder came about as a result of a fight between the two women, with Mary striking Sarah in self-defense. After deliberating only 3 hours, the 12-member, all-male jury returned a guilty verdict. Mary's reaction to the conviction and immediate sentencing to death by electrocution was one of stoical indifference which had characterized her manner throughout the trial. The conviction was appealed to no avail. The last night before her execution, all night long the wretched Mary had prayed within her cell on the second tier on the woman's department in the condemned row, after she had bade farewell to her husband. In a note written the night before her execution, Mary said that her husband, James, was not involved in Sarah Brennan's murder in any way. Separated by steel bars and an intervening screen, husband and wife spent their final hours together in quiet conversation. Locked in his cell in a faraway corner of the prison, Jim Farmer, the husband, prayed during the hour of his wife's execution. She had told him she had to die at dawn, and that she had made a statement that he was innocent of the crime. The man verged on collapse from grief, and he frequently gave way to tears. The final word was spoken, a last goodbye. The weeping husband returned to his cell, and the hapless woman was led down the narrow corridor. In the pale ochre light of the corridor the woman and priest prayed together. The last sacrament was administered, and Mrs. Farmer said she was not afraid to die. State Electrician Davis tested the dynamos and wires leading to the death chamber. Everything was found to be in working order. Warden Benham nodded to Captain Patterson. There was a low knock at the street door. The door was opened by someone within, and the wretched woman was let in. The priest led the way, offering an almost inaudible prayer, while just behind him came Mary Farmer. Her hands clasped a crucifix, and she murmured until the end came. On March 29, 1909, Mary Farmer was electrocuted at Auburn State Prison. According to her priest, she died a good Catholic. Mrs. Farmer was dressed in a plain black waist and shirt. Her hair was brushed back from her forehead and fell in 2 braids. 2 or 3 locks were cut from the scalp so that the electrode might be properly adjusted, and the woman attendant slit the left side of the skirt as far as the knee and cut the stocking. None except those having official invitations were admitted to the execution. The 3 witnesses were Dr. H. M. Westfall of Moravia, New York, Miss Agnes Baird of Troy, and Miss Margaret T. Byrne of Auburn. Miss Baird and Miss Byrne of Auburn. Miss Baird and Miss Byrne are nurses. When all was in readiness, the witnesses were formed in line after being cautioned against any demonstration and led into the death chamber. Mary Farmer was the second woman to die in the electric chair in New York. The first was Mrs. Martha M. Place, who was executed in 1899 for the Brooklyn murder of her stepdaughter. 7 other women had been executed by hanging in New York before the electric chair was instituted. James Farmer had a happier life. He came to trial for Sarah Brennan's murder in October 1908. He was convicted October 30th, but the conviction was reversed by the Court of Appeals after James had spent 53 weeks on death row at Auburn Prison. In fact, James was in a cell only a few feet away from the death chamber when Mary was executed. James was later brought back to Jefferson County and tried for forgery of the Brennan deed. He was acquitted in 1910 and spent the rest of his life quietly as a mill worker in Brownville. Thank you for watching Death Row.